Welcome to my first EDH deck tag on MTG Foil. If you are looking for a fun deck or a budget deck, it's probably time to leave now, because this deck is a tier 1 competitive, insanely expensive deck. It took me around 2 years to collect all the pieces, and today I'm gonna share this with you guys. I must say I've built this deck pure out of hatred with all those infinite shenanigans in the EDH format. After being owned in EDH so many times, it was time to strike back. I built a deck to rule them all. I must tell you, this deck is not meant for an FNM. It's not meant to have fun. It's built to win. Krenko Mob Boss, 2 red, 2 colorless. Tap. Put X, a 1/1 red goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is the number of goblins you control. Probably you notice directly these cards are altered by Kevin Lapage from France. If you're interested in the alterations of Kevin Lapage, there's a link to his Facebook page and to another video down in the video description. The meaning of this deck is to create thousands of goblin tokens with infinite combos. Let me show you how. Although Krenko Mob Boss is a red commander, we're still running a lot of non-basic lands. First, Cavern of Souls. Land. As Cavern of Souls enter the battlefield, choose a creature type. Of course we're gonna choose goblins. Tap it, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Or tap it, add 1 of any color. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells of the chosen type, and that spell can't be countered. Great ability if you want to cast Krenko so it can be countered, or other great goblins in this deck. Nyktos, Shrine to Nyx. Legendary land. Tap it, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Pay 2, choose a color. Add to your mana pool an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. Really nice to ramp a lot of mana if you've got a lot of red cards on the battlefield. Great Furnace, artifact land. Great Furnace isn't a spell. Tap it, add 1 red mana to your mana pool. Soon you will find out why we're using artifact lands in this deck. Mutavault, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. For 1, Mutavault becomes a 2/2 creature with all creature types until the end of turn. It's still a land. Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, enters the battlefield tapped. Whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, if you control at least 5 other mountains, you may have Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Add 1 red mana to your mana pool. Great land to deal damage when you've got already several mountains into play. Madblind Mountain. Tap, add 1 red mana to your mana pool. Comes into play tapped. 1 red, shuffle your library. Play this ability only if you control 2 or more red permanents. Gives us the ability to shuffle our deck if we have got a Sensei Divining Top into play. Maze of It. Untap target attacking creature. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. A great way to protect another player or yourself from a giant creature. Ancient Tomb. Great in your opening hand. Add 2 colorless to your mana pool. Ancient Tomb deals 2 damage to you. Homeward Path. Add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Each player gains control of all creatures he or she owns. Great card for players who try to get control of your commander or trying to get control of all your creatures. Buried Ruin. Produces 1 colorless mana. Pay to sacrifice Buried Ruin. Turn target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Detection Tower. Add 1 colorless, pay 1. Until the end of turn, your opponent and creatures your opponent controls with hexproof can be the target of spells and abilities you control as though they didn't have hexproof. Gives you the ability to target creatures with hexproof. Goblin Burrows uses 1 colorless mana. Pay 1 colorless and pay 1 red. Tap, target goblin gets +2/+0 until the end of turn. Wasteland produces 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Sacrifice Wasteland, destroy target non-basic land. Ready to disable a Tron in EDH or another Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, or other shenanigans. Then we come to the basic mountains. I'm running 21 basic mountains, and in total I've got 35 lands. I've got 3 sorceries in this deck. The first one is Gamble. Search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, discard the card at random, and shuffle your library. This is great to search for answers for current threats. Vandal Blast. Destroy target artifact you don't control, and for 5 mana, Overload. For 4 colorless and 1 red, you can destroy each artifact you don't control. Great card in EDH. Hard to pronounce for a Dutch guy. Blasphemous Act. 1 red, 8 colorless. Blasphemous Act costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, and Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature. You can imagine if you've got a lot of goblins on the battlefield, it probably costs you 1 red to cast. Great to have an answer for all those big creatures out there during mid-range games. So 3 sorceries, Vandal Blast to destroy each artifact you don't control on the battlefield, and Blasphemous Act to kill probably all creatures on the battlefield, and Gamble to fetch for answers for current game state. Then we have the enchantments, Mass Hysteria. All creatures have haste. Great ability to give Krenko directly haste. Big chance this is the only deck that will benefit from this. Quest for the Goblin Lord, an enchantment. Whenever a goblin enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a quest counter on Quest of the Goblin Lord. As long as Quest for the Goblin Lord has 5 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +2/+0. Absolutely a must in this deck. Impact Tremors. 1 red, 1 colorless. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. Can you imagine tapping Krenko and this is on the battlefield? Shared Anomicity. 1 red, 2 colorless. Whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until the end of turn for each attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. Can you imagine attacking your opponents with 20 goblin tokens and this is on the battlefield? Absolutely insane. Blood Moon. Non-basic lands are mountains. Absolutely insane in Commander. You don't want to know how many decks you can shut down. Absolutely unfair vs multiple color EDH decks. Although it shut downs our utility lands, it doesn't really matter because we're still able to cast anything in our deck. Therefore, creatures you control have haste. Just another way to start the shenanigans ASAP by giving everything you own haste. Goblin Assault. Enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token with haste. Goblin creatures attack each turn if able. Great card to produce even more goblin tokens. Bogart Shenanigans. Whenever another goblin you control is put onto the graveyard from play, you may have Bogart Shenanigans deals 1 damage to target player. Imagine a board wipe. If you've got 100 tokens on the battlefield, you can kill a player instantly. Breath of Fury. 2 red, 2 colorless, enchant creature you control. When enchant creature deals combat damage to a player, sacrifice it and attach Breath of Fury to a creature you control. If you do, untap all creatures you control, and after this phase there's another additional combat phase. Absolutely unfair. Imagine untapping all your creatures after an attack phase and tap Krenko again and attack again. Do this over and over again. Absolutely insane card in this deck. Mana Echoes. 2 red, 2 colorless, enchantment. Whenever a creature comes into play, you may add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool for each creature you control that shares a creature type with it. After tapping Krenko, you're swimming in colorless mana. Now the artifact equipment. Swift-foot boots. Equipped creature get hexproof and haste. Equip for 1 colorless. Pray to protect Krenko and give it haste and tap as fast as possible for more goblins. Sword of the Parents. As long as equipment creature is tapped, tapped creatures you control get +2/+0. As long as equipped creature is untapped, untapped creatures you control get +0/+2. Put this under Krenko and for 3 colorless you can tap it again. And you're giving all your goblins +2/+0. Umbral Mantle. Equipped creature has pay 3. Untap this creature gets +2/+2 until the end of turn. Equip for 0. So for 3 mana you can untap Krenko, which is another way to create even more tokens during 1 turn. Stormbite Staff. 2 colorless. Equipped creature has pay 2. Tap. This creature deals 1 damage to target creature or player, and whenever a creature is put into the graveyard from play, untap this creature. Whenever a shaman creature comes into play, you may attach Stormbite Staff to it. Equip for 4. With this card you can go infinite on Krenko. By sacrifice creatures you can untap it and make more tokens. Helm of the Host. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary. If equipped creature is legendary, that token gains haste. Equip for 5. Great way to make a copy of Krenko and make even more tokens during a turn. Skull Clamp. 1 colorless, equipped creature get +1/-1. An equipped creature is put into a graveyard, draw 2 cards, equip for 1. Out of cards, just equip it under a 1/1 token and draw a card. Here we have got the artifacts. Mana Vault. 1 colorless. Mana Vault doesn't untap during your untap step. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay for if you do untap Mana Vault. At the beginning of your draw step, if Mana Vault is tapped, it deals 1 damage to you. Tap it, produce 3 colorless mana. Great in an opening hand for mana ramping. Soul Ring, 1 colorless. Adds 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Great in your opening hand. Altar of the Brood. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Just another win solution for this deck. Just mill your opponent out. Great vs Miracle decks, Scry decks, doesn't really matter. With a few goblins, tap Krenko. Before they know it, their library turns into their graveyard. Sensei Defining Top, 1 colorless. Pay 1, look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. Tap, draw a card, then put Sensei Divining Top onto its owner's library. Talking about setting your priorities. Throne of the God Peril, 2 colorless, legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. So after just attacking with, for example, 5 Goblin tokens, it's dealing 15 damage overall divided among your opponents. A great card to deal damage without doing anything. Scroll Whack, 2 colorless. Exile any number of cards from your hand. Face down, put that many cards on the top of your library into your hand. Then look at the exiled cards and put them on top of your library in any order. To organize your draw steps, really great card in actually any EDH deck. 1000 Years Elixir, 3 colorless. You may cast the activated ability of a creature you control as though creatures have haste. For 1 colorless and tap, untap target creature. Yet another way to untap Krenko and use his ability again. Ashnod's Altar, 3 colorless. Sacrifice a creature, add 2 colorless to your mana pool. By sacrificing tokens, etc., we're able to cast cards faster. Mirage Mirror, 3 colorless. Pay 2, Mirage Mirror becomes a copy of target artifact, creature, enchantment or land until end of turn. If there's anything on the battlefield you cannot handle, copy it. See anything you own that your opponents can't handle it, copy it. Phyrexian Altar, 3 colorless. Sacrifice a creature at 1 mana of any color. Another way to create mana by sacrificing tokens and go infinite fast. Rings of Brightheart, 3 colorless. Whenever you play an activated ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 2. If you do, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. Yet another way to use a Krenko ability more than once in 1 turn, or actually any other activated ability in this deck. Vanquisher's Banner, 5 colorless. As Vanquisher Banners enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, draw a card. Vanquisher Banner provides card draw and increase the endurance of our tokens. Eldrazi Monument, 5 colorless. Creatures you control get +1/+1, have flying and are indestructible. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. If you can, sacrifice Eldrazi Monument. Yet another way to make our tokens a pain in the ass for the opponent. The Immortal Sun, 6 colorless legendary artifact. Players can't activate Planeswalker loyalty abilities. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card. Spells you cast cost 1 colorless less to cast. Creatures you control get +1/+1. The Immortal Sun, a powerhouse in EDH. Shutdowns Super Friends, it shutdowns any Planeswalker on the battlefield. It provides card draw and makes spells cheaper. The Creature Base. First 1-drops. Goblin Surgeon, 1 red, 0/2, pay 0, sacrifice a goblin to regenerate a target creature. With this card we can protect Krenko Mob Boss and other important goblins in our deck. For the real MTG diehards who probably noticed this card doesn't exist foiled, so I let it altered by Captain Alter. I made a video about this, there's a link in the video description. There's also a link to the Alter's Facebook page. Goblin Slather, 1 red. Sacrifice a goblin, target creature get +1/+1 until the end of turn. When your opponent is low in life and he's blocking a lot of your goblins, just sacrifice them to pump the goblins that doesn't get blocked. The reason why we're running artifact lands in our mana base is Goblin Welder. 1 red, tap, Choose target artifact the player controls and target artifact card in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal as this ability resolves, that player simultaneously sacrifice the artifact and return the artifact card to the battlefield. A nice ability to trade one of our artifact lands with one destroyed artifact in our graveyard. Goblin Lackey, 1 red. When Goblin Lackey deals combat damage to a player, you may put a Goblin permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you've got Goblin Lackey in your opening hand, there's a high possibility that the situation goes out of hand very quickly for your opponents. The 2 drops. Grenzo Havoc Razor. This card can function as well as the secondary commander for this deck. Legendary creature Goblin Rogue. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, choose one. Goat target creature that player controls. Goat means that target creature needs to attack next turn, but it cannot attack you. Second ability, exile the top card of that player's library until the end of turn. You may cast that card, and you may spend mana as true it were mana of any color to cast it. Imagine attacking your opponents with a lot of tokens. Every time a token goes through to your opponent, you may trigger one of these abilities to your opponent. Dark Dweller Oracle, 1 red, 1 colorless. 2/2. Pay 1 colorless, sacrifice a creature, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Another great way to play cards when you're empty-handed. Warren Instigator. Red, double strike. Whenever Warren Instigators deal damage to an opponent, you may put a Goblin creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Every time when an attack goes through, put 2 Goblin cards from your hand into play. Goblin Engineer, 1 red, 1 colorless. When Goblin Engineer enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card, put it into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. Pay 1 red, tap, sacrifice an artifact, return target artifact card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. A great way to fetch any of your artifacts to your graveyard and trade it with one of the artifact lands. Goblin Recruiter, 1 red, 1 colorless. When Goblin Recruiters comes into play, search your library for any number of Goblin cards, review those cards to all players, shuffle your library, then put those cards on top of your library in any order. Yet another non-existent foil card, altered by Captain Alter. This card is a must in this deck. If this card resolves, you probably won the game, because you can search for all the answers you need and put them on top of your library. Now we come to the 3 drops. Goblin Sharpshooter, 1 red, 2 colorless. Goblin Sharpshooter doesn't untap during your untap step. Whenever a creature is put into the graveyard from play, untap Goblin Sharpshooter. Goblin Sharpshooter deals 1 damage to target creature or player. There are many ways to untap this creature and deals infinite damage. Really unfair for your opponents. Imperial Recruiter, 1 red, 2 colorless. When Imperial Recruiter enters the battlefield, search your library for a creature card with power 2 or less, review it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. Included to fetch Goblin Recruiter and set your library up for a win condition. Goblin Chieftain, 2 red, 1 colorless, 2/2, haste. Other Goblin creatures you control get +1/+1 and have haste. Imagine what happened with all your created tokens if you tap Krenko. Goblin Matron, 1 red, 2 colorless. 1/1. When Goblin Matrons comes into play, you may search your library for a Goblin card. If you do, review that card and put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. Another way to search for answers in your library. Krenko Tin Street Kingpin, 1 red, 2 colorless. Legendary creature Goblin. Whenever Krenko Tin Street Kingpin attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then create a number of 1/1 red Goblin creature tokens equal to Krenko's power. Another way to create a lot of tokens. If your opponent doesn't deal fast with this card, it goes out of hand quickly. Goblin Rebel Master, 1 red, 2 colorless, 2/2. Other Goblin creatures you control attack each turn if able. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a 1/1 red Goblin creature token with haste onto the battlefield. Whenever Goblin Rebel Master attacks, it gets +1/+0 until the end of turn for each other attacking Goblin. Another way to get more goblins on the battlefield. It makes all your other goblins attack, but it doesn't really matter. Goblin Warchief, 2 red, 1 colorless, 2/2. Goblin spells you cast cost 1 colorless less to cast. Goblin creatures you control have haste. This card saves you a lot of mana and gives all your goblin haste. Magus of the Moon, 1 red, 2 colorless. Non-basic lands are mountains. Perhaps not a goblin, but very powerful because it can shut down your opponent's non-basic lands. Sensation Gorger, 2 red, 1 colorless, 2/2. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may look at the top card of your library. If it shares a creature type with Sensation Gorger, you may reveal it. If you do, each player discards his or her hand and draw 4 cards. A nice ability to let your opponent discard cards or get rid of those cards that they just fetched. Goblin King, 2 red, 1 colorless. Other goblin creatures get +1/+1 and have Mountain Walk. Really nice with a Blood Moon on the table or a Magnus of the Moon. Keep in mind that it gives your opponent's goblins as well Mountain Walk and +1/+1. Legion War Boss, 1 red, 2 colorless. At the beginning of combat, on your turn, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. That token gains haste until end of turn and attacks this combat if able. It has Mentor. Whenever this creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power. Before we gonna continue to the 4 drops, I found out that Skirk Prospector escaped the 1 drops. Bad Skirk. Skirk Prospector, 1 red, 1/1. Sacrifice a goblin at 1 red mana. With this card we can go infinite many ways. Produce mana, sacrifice goblins. Imagine what it does with impact Tremors, with Goblin Sharpshooter. And if you've got more than 6 goblin on the battlefield, you can just sacrifice Krenko Mob Boss, cast it again, tap it again, making infinite 1/1 goblins. One of the best 1 drops in this deck. The 4 drops. Lightning Crafter, 1 red, 3 colorless, champion a goblin or a shaman. When this comes into play, sacrifice it unless you remove another goblin or shaman you control from the game. When this leaves play, that card returns to play. Tap. Lightning Crafter deals 3 damage to target creature or player. To combo off with one of our artifact equipments. If we're able to untap this, we can do a lot of damage in 1 turn. Goblin Trashmaster, 2 red, 2 colorless. Other goblins you control get +1/+1. Sacrifice a goblin, destroy target artifact. Great way to deal with artifacts. Plus it helps all your other goblins by giving them +1/+1. Goblin Ringleader, 1 red, 3 colorless. 2/2. Haste. When Goblin Ringleader comes into play, review the top 4 cards of your library. Put all goblin cards reviewed this way into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library. You might think, why include this card if there are so many non-goblin cards in this deck? It has to do with Goblin Recruiter. If you search for the goblins and you put this one on top, when you cast Goblin Ringleader, you can grab 4 of those goblins, put it on your library top. A great combination with Goblin Recruiter. Mock Catcher, 2 red, 2 colorless, it's not a goblin. Pay 3, tap, search your library for a goblin card and put that card onto play. Then shuffle your library. Absolutely insane. You can search for any goblin card in your deck and put it on the battlefield instantly. Another broken goblin card, Goblin Wizard, 2 red, 2 colorless. Take a goblin from your hand and put it directly into play. Treat this goblin as it were just summoned. Basically, you can put each turn a goblin card from your hand into play without paying any mana cost. If you pay 1 red, target goblin gains protection from white until the end of turn. This card doesn't exist foil. Captain Alter has made this look like a foil for me. Orch Battle Driver, 2 red, 2 colorless. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature gets +2/+0 and gains haste until the end of turn. Making tokens, they directly get haste and +2/+0 and are ready to attack. The 5 mana costing drops. Goblin Assassin, 2 red, 3 colorless. When Goblin Assassin or another goblin comes into play, each player flips a coin. Each player whose coin comes up till sacrifice a creature. This card can go insane after tapping Krenko Mob Boss. There's a high possibility that your opponents need to sacrifice all their creatures, while you just sacrifice tokens. Siege Gang Commander, 3 colorless, 2 red, 2/2. When Siege Gang Commander enters the battlefield, create 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Pay 1 red and 1 colorless, sacrifice a goblin. Siege Gang Commander deals 2 damage to any target. Imagine casting this card at turn 2 with a little bit help of Goblin Lackey, for example. Amazing card. Plus it gives you removal by sacrificing Goblin. Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker, 3 red, 2 colorless. Haste. Tap. Create a token that's a copy of target non-legendary creature you control. That token has haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. There are so many awesome creatures in our deck to copy. For example, Siege Gang Commander, Goblin Assassin, Goblin Welder, Imperial Recruiter, Goblin Matron, Goblin Engineer, plus with Helm of the Host out, we can even make a copy of Krenko Mob Boss and go infinite. Then we come to the last card of this deck, is Skirk Fire Marshal. 3 red, 2 colorless, creature Goblin Lord. A 2/2, protection from red. Tap 5 untapped goblins you control. Skirk Fire Marshal deals 10 damage to each creature and player. Imagine tapping 15 goblins. You've won the game. Another win condition in this deck. It took me 2 years to complete this deck. I had many inspirations from you guys on YouTube, so I really wanted to share this deck with you guys. It's an absolutely powerful deck. The only downside of this deck what I ever experienced is that your opponent's starting to focus you as soon as they realize this deck is insane. But usually they are too late. If you've got questions, please leave them in the comments and I will answer them. If you're thinking about piloting a Krenko deck, of course you can use a lot of beautiful token cards, but as you can understand, it goes quickly out of hand and you will not be able to have that many token cards. I advise you guys to use these beautiful Ultra Pro relic tokens. You can put them on your token cards and keep track of your token numbers. Keep in mind, using these, that you separate the tokens created with Summon and Sickness and the tokens without Summon and Sickness. Just an unnecessary nice finishing touch on this Krenko deck. Thank you for watching to my first Commander EDH deck tech. I really hope you enjoyed this video, so if you did, please leave a like, or even better, subscribe to my channel. This will definitely motivate me to make more of this beautiful deck techs. Thank you again for watching and I see you on my next foil deck tech video.